This Sunday, the state of Iowa celebrates its 179th birthday. While the Civil War was still 15 years away, the simmering feud between free and slave states helped spur Iowa's creation. In tonight's edition of We the People, our Larry Wentz has more on how Iowa became the 29th state to join the Union.
The tension between the states certainly fuels Iowa's move towards statehood in 1846.
Kevin Mason is an assistant professor of history at the University of Northern Iowa. He says Iowa was part of a number of territories, including Wisconsin, before becoming Iowa Territory in 1838. But where did the name Iowa come from?
People, including the State Historical Society of Iowa in the past, have credited Albert Lea with giving Iowa its name.
Yes, the man Albert Lea, Minnesota is named for. The Tennessee native was an Army engineer posted to Fort Des Moines along the Mississippi River, mapping and surveying the land. His writings mention the Iowa District, which may be a nod to the Iowa tribe that once called the area home.
Florida is our companion state to maintain that balance of power between free and slave states in the Congress of the United States.
There were various proposals for Iowa's borders.
The last border before the one that we know is the northern border today is going to extend all the way from kind of your viewership's neck of the woods out there in Sioux City, all the way up to the Minnesota River. And this would put a large chunk of the city of St. Paul in the state of Iowa.
But an arbitrary line was drawn much further south.
It then created a better opportunity to create another free state later out of Minnesota that could be brought into the Union to maintain that congressional balance of power.
A dispute over Iowa's southern border with Missouri lasted for years, eventually settled by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Prior to the Civil War, that is the boundary between freedom and enslavement in the United States.
The first governor of the state of Iowa was Vermont native Ansel Briggs. He operated a stagecoach business when he moved to Iowa, later serving as a sheriff, a member of the Territorial House of Representatives, and eventually being elected as the Democratic governor 3 months before official statehood. Now, here's an interesting note about the people who've come to live in the state of Iowa. Roughly 30% of Iowans have a German background. That is fifth among all the states. That's followed by the Irish and finally the English. Larry Wentz, KTIV News 4.